Here we go. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Lunch and Learn. We couldn't bring you the good weather today, but we can bring you, as always, the most incredible and amazing people in Bushy. Say hello, everyone. Hooray! There we go. So we are live. We are live. We're going to talk for a couple of minutes about Parshat Balak. And then we are going to move on to Pirkei Avot. And boy, do I think we are going to have a hard time this week. But let's start with Parashat Balak, a brief summary and a brief synopsis of what is to come in this week's Torah reading. Boy, is it dramatic. Oh, man. It's all about King Balak, who employs Bilam, the sorcerer, Bilam, the non-Jewish prophet, who is, by the way, we're taught that Bilam is given the same prophetic level, as it were, of Moshe Rabbeinu. He was not as holy by any stretch of the imagination as Moses, as Moshe, but we're taught that he was given a very high level of prophecy. And that was in order that when throughout history we refer to Moshe as being this incredible guy, perhaps people will turn around and say, well, yeah, of course he was an incredible guy. Look what he had. He had the ability to talk to Hashem and he was a prophet and he was the best prophet and all the rest of it. And we'll be able to turn around and say, well, I hear what you're saying, but there was this other guy called Bilam and he was also gifted this prophetic connection, and look what he chose to do with it. So we see in this week's parasha that Bilam decides that he's going to follow along with Balak, and he is going to go and curse the Jewish people, Ochenvei, as they say. And at first he rejects. At first he tries to back out of having to go with Balak, but everyone's got a price, and so when he gets when he negotiates to where he wants to be, so he goes along. And the Torah talks about how zealous and how enthusiastic he was to go, to the point that he wakes up early, he saddles his own donkey, and he sets off to go and curse the Jewish people. And as we talked about in Pirkei Avot, I think only a couple of weeks ago, the mouth of the donkey that was created moments before Shabbat on the sixth day of creation. So the mouth of the donkey comes into play over here. And the donkey is able to see this angel blocking the path. And he stops, and Bilam can't get him to move. And so he starts hitting the donkey, and all of a sudden the donkey opens its mouth and says, "What are you playing at, man? Can't you see this guy in front of us?" And that is also one of the famous parts of this week's parasha. So then they go, and from a few different vantage points, Bilam tries to curse the Jewish people. And he can't do it. He cannot do it. It's not working. And he ends up blessing the Jewish people. One of the blessings, as we may recall, the famous words, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishknotecha Yisrael. How beautiful, how wonderful are your tents, O Jacob. He sees the Jewish home, and he has no choice but to give it words of blessing instead of words of curse. An amazingly powerful thing. The fact that everybody lived in a modest and private way, the way in which their tents were all organized to be able to allow for privacy between each other, each family, the way in which Bnei Yisrael ultimately conduct themselves in creating a holy, sacred bubble to be able to raise their children in. These are not things to be taken lightly. These are not things to be scoffed at. They're certainly not things that can be cursed. And so Bilam ends up blessing the Jewish people as a result. Which actually just jumps into my head, the idea that non-Jews respect Jews who respect themselves. And when we act appropriately, when we do things properly, so the world actually looks up to that. And when we compromise on our standards, and we behave in a contradictory fashion or in a hypocritical fashion, it will be picked up. People notice it. So that's just something that occurred to me. And then the final part of this week's parasha is the Moabite attempt to seduce the Jewish men, and as a result of this, there's a plague that breaks out in the Jewish camp, and it's only when Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron HaKohen, grabs a spear in his hand and kills the two people who were violating this code of decency, privacy, sneers, modesty, whatever you want to call it. He goes and he kills both of these individuals, and then the plague ends. So it's a dramatic parasha, and as we've mentioned, I think several occasions before, the Jewish people won't have had a clue that all of this was going on. They'll have only found out about this down the line. That unbeknownst to them, you had this guy standing far away from the Jewish camp trying to curse the Jewish people. But Hashem was protecting us, and he didn't get it. He didn't get the curses in. So there we go. Just one other small idea. I'm a bit unhappy that Paul's signed on because he heard this yesterday. Welcome, Paul. So there's Matovu in this week's parasha, and it made me think of another Matov, which there's quite a beautiful idea behind. The other Matov is from Psalms, Tehillim. Hinei Matov umanaim shevet achim gam yachad. Behold how great and how pleasant it is when brothers can live in peace together. And this idea that I heard a few years ago from Rabbi Y. Jacobson in America, he said that you've got Hinei Matov Umanaim, that something is good and something is pleasant, right? So there are many things in the world which are good, and there are many things in the world which are pleasant, right? You can have chocolate and sweets and cake, which are pleasant, they're delicious, but they're not very good for you. And you can have things which are very good for you, like kale and spinach and vegetables, but they're not particularly pleasant. And says King David in Tehillim, in Psalms, that it is both tov and na'im, it is both good and pleasant and beautiful when people are able to live side by side and people are able to live together in peace. Shevet achim gam yachad. So that idea came to my mind yesterday. And it came to my mind today, so I thought I would share it with you. So there we go, a little word on this week's parasha. Let's move on, guys, to Pirkei Avot. We are in for a roller coaster. We are in for a treat. We probably do want to say some words of introduction. We will do our best with these next two Mishnayos, but I think the one thing that we kind of have to open our minds, open our hearts to is the concept that what we do in this world really does have its consequences. Perhaps one of the reasons why we are experiencing such global reactions to the way in which we treat the planet, right? We were talking about global warming just before. I don't know if we caught it on the recording or not, can't remember. But perhaps one of the reasons why the global warming, what's the word? The global warming, not campaign, stronger than campaign, but the battle, as it were, to get the world to change and to really understand the consequences of our actions in this world in a physical sense. Perhaps that's all there to help us understand that we have a spiritual impact on the world as well through our actions, right? If I build a huge factory and I pump out loads of pollution, I'm going to affect the environment around me. And one thing that perhaps we don't really truly appreciate and don't really tune into and might not resonate with us is that the actions that we do have a spiritual impact and a spiritual consequence on the world. When we do good, then we create good. When we do bad, we create bad. How this works, I cannot tell you, but it is an idea um, that is Judaic in its origin. It is part of the fundamentals of our Judaism, that the things that we do have an impact physically and they have an impact spiritually as well. So with that in mind, let's give this a go. The most we can do is give it our best shot. All right. It is not without its challenges. It is not without its controversy, if you like. And it may not be how we normally typically look at the world, but we're going to open our minds. We're going to open our hearts. We're going to see how it goes. So it's kind of in two parts a little bit. You've got Mishnah, well, it's 8 on the screen, but it's Mishnah 10 in our books, chapter 5. That's the first part, and that's the second part. So it's divided into two Mishnahs, but it's essentially one. So let's take it through just from the beginning, and then maybe we'll hand it over for someone to read in the English. Shiva minei puraniot ba'in la'olam al shiva gufei avera. 7 kinds of punishment come to the world for 7 categories of transgression. All right, so does someone want to take us through? We're going to have to probably, I haven't cross-checked the English again, but does someone want to take us through this first part? Oh, what was just done? Anyone want to read? Martin, you're muted, so... Satisfied. So is it a bit difficult to read there? Perversion. Thank you. And then let's just have a look at the next part as well, just so we see it. Mm. Sorry, stop there. That's actually the next one. We'll stop there. All right. So we're gonna have to take this carefully. We're gonna have to take this diplomatically. Um, so puraniot there in the Hebrew, punishment is definitely one angle to the translation of the word. I guess other words could be bad things come to the world. 7 kinds of bad things of difficult, yes, calamities. That's a good word as well. Come to the world for 7 kinds of transgressions, for 7 areas in which mankind may may be doing the wrong thing. So this is, yeah, okay. But I think the starting point really is along the lines of what I was introducing before. Actions have consequences. That's right. And so the Mishnah is telling us over here that actually there are very severe repercussions to what people may do in the world. Now, I want us to be very, very careful. We have to be so careful when we're going through this because, as we've said on many occasions, we don't know exactly why things happen. People will ask, why did this happen? Why did that happen? Why did this calamity, this accident, this, whatever it might be? Why do these things happen? And we don't know exactly why things happen. But the Mishnah is nonetheless giving us, I guess, a pattern that there would be things that there are consequences to the actions of humanity. So let's take us through some of these things. Yeah, everybody ready? Let's take us through some of these things because the English is not brilliant as we often struggle with. So let's just do what we can. So the first thing the Mishnah says is just to maybe allow one more word of introduction to this. There is a concept known as midah keneged midah, that I guess you could translate it loosely as the punishment fits the crime. Right? Hashem will cause things to happen in the world which are commensurate with actions that have been done. So we talked in the past about the punishments to the Egyptians were done midah keneged midah, right? They were a proportionate response, which is a really hard thing to say, right? Calamities that happen in the world ultimately are commensurate and are proportional with things that are happening in the world. Now, it doesn't mean that the victims in particular calamities are being punished for particular things, right? We've also mentioned, was it last week or is it maybe it's in my notes this week? But there are people who can get swept up in a punishment that may not have necessarily um, been they may not have been the target and the focus of a particular punishment, but because the spiritual mechanism is that something can be brought to the world for the way in which mankind behaves, so there are going to be innocent people that get swept up in that. And there are going to be people who are like, oh my gosh, how could they be one of the people to suffer? They were such a good person. Well, what we're going to see is that if the actions collectively bring about these calamities and these tragedies and these proportional midah keneged midah responses, right? Then that's because the natural course of these things are going to mean that they get swept up in them as well. So, has anything that I've said so far been extremely unclear? No? Okay. So, I'm just going to try and spoil this a bit, I think. Is that clearer on this? No, what have I done? Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. So, so that's by way of introduction. All right. When a calamity comes to the world, the Meiri says, one of the commentaries says, the Meiri says that when a calamity comes to the world, it's there to arouse people to scrutinize themselves and to look at their own actions, right? Something could be happening right across the other end of the world, which has nothing to do with us. And so we think, like, oh, phew, I've escaped that. But actually, one of the things that we're taught is that even if something is going on the other side of the world, for whatever reason that might be, and we may never understand the reason, etc., but any time that we learn about something like this, something bad that's happening in the world, these things are supposed to encourage us to look at our own failings, look at our own actions, look at the areas where we may need pay attention to. So let's just take a look at it. Let's give this a go, guys. All right. Let's hold hands and go through it together. Miktsatan ma'asrin and miktsatan einan ma'asrin. Ra'av shel batsoret ba. So the first level of this is if some people tithe and others do not. So what's tithing? We've talked about this before. When you grow fruits, you're supposed to separate some of these fruits to give to different people. Some to the Kohanim, some to the Leviim, some to poor people, some you're supposed to take up to Jerusalem. There's all different things that we're supposed to be doing. There's lots of different halachot that we are supposed to be ensuring are taken care of when we grow our own produce. Or even if we buy Israeli produce, we are supposed to make sure that these things have been tithed correctly. So the Mishnah says, if some people tithe and others do not, then a famine caused by lack of rain will come about. Some will go hungry and some will be satisfied. So the result, as it were, of a mixture of people, some doing the right thing and some doing the wrong thing in this particular area of tithing, right, then the result is a mixed famine. Some people are going to come out on top and some people are going to really, really struggle, right? And so that's level one, as it were. We're supposed to understand that the things that we grow are ultimately coming from Hashem and not coming from ourselves. They don't really belong to us, even though they may be growing on our property, even though we may legally own them, whatever it might be. Truly, they belong to our Creator, and so we allocate a portion of that to express our gratitude, to express our recognition that these things have been gifted to us by Hashem. And if we fail to get that message, and if we fail to therefore tithe correctly, so it has a spiritual ramification. It may bring a spiritual ramification which manifests itself in a physical reality, and it will bring a famine, but not a famine that affects everybody. It's only going to affect some people. Maybe not the people that we think it should be affecting, and it's not literally going to single out the people that haven't been tithing, but it's a proportionate response. Some people were faithful to this mitzvah and some people were not, and as a result, the reaction is that Hashem creates a calamity which only affects some people. All right, then the next part of this is, though, if everybody decided not to tithe, if we decided, we sanctioned as a society, we say, no, that's it, there's no tithing, we're not going to do this mitzvah, we're not going to have our part in it, then the Mishnah says, general famine caused by armed bands, right, how did it say it there? From tumult and drought. In the Hebrew, Ra'av shel mehuma v'shel batsoret ba. So the next of these 7 types of punishments is that if everybody as a society we decide that we're not going to do, we're going to sanction and not allow anybody to tithe, then there's going to be a famine that affects everybody. Right? So that's the general famine that is going to affect everybody. And maybe it will come because of a drought. Maybe it will come because there'll be an invasion, and as a result of the invasion, the ability to distribute food to the nation is going to be affected. So whichever means Hashem may choose to employ, the punishment will ultimately be that everybody will be affected by this shortage. The next part, v'shelo litol et hachala ra'av shel klayaba. If they decide not to separate challah, okay, I think on the where is it on the screen? When they, in addition, decide not to set apart the dough offering, right? So whenever we bake bread, if you bake with a particular quantity of dough, which I think is about 1.4 kilos. Okay, so if you've got 1.4 kilos of flour that you're going to be baking with, So you have to take a small portion of that dough, and you have to historically give it to the Kohanim. Nowadays we just destroy it, we get rid of it because we can't give it to we don't have the temple anymore. But the point is that a tiny small gesture that you have to make. You've got 1.4 kilos of flour to yourself. You can make half a dozen loaves of bread with 1.4 kilos of flour, and you can't even take even a small part of that to give to someone else. So if nationally, if collectively, if as a society, you can't even give this tall, small, tiny, inconsequential portion to be able to help out other people, then says the Mishnah, a famine caused by fatal drought, an all-consuming famine will come about. It's a crazy thing. You might think, how is that proportionate? That's a huge punishment for something so tiny. But there's an important angle, an important perspective to all of this, which is it's the fact that you can't even do, society will have got to a point where you can't even do something so small and so insignificant. Doesn't matter if you think it's insignificant, doesn't matter if you think it doesn't make a difference, doesn't matter if you think that it's only a small portion and that, you know, who's really caring and who's really looking and who's going to know and blah, 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 blah. If we can't as a society appreciate that this tiny insignificant fraction that we would have to give to somebody else, if we can't even buy into that, right, then that's an indication that we've really gone off kilter. And that's perhaps why the punishment, the poraniot, the calamity is that much more severe. You know, once upon a time, Kohanim and Leviim would not have anything to eat if it wasn't for these portions being separated, right? And so it's only if you are purposely refusing to do these small gestures that such a heavy calamity may be brought about. You know, you also only have to separate that portion if you have got the right amount of flour. If you've got 1.38 kilos of flour, you're not obligated in taking that separation. Or I'm not sure if it is 1.4, maybe it's 1.2. I can't remember off the top of my head. But the point is, if you don't meet that threshold, then you don't have to make the separation. There's no mitzvah, as it were, to separate this piece off. But if you did have that amount and you were purposely belittling the importance, belittling the significance, purposely being stingy in that area, then it has a spiritual ramification which manifests itself with a physical physical calamity. So that is, in my book, that's Mishnah Yud. Do we want to see the rest of them? Should we explain the rest of them, and then we can kind of discuss this a bit further? Okay, so on the screen we're still in the same Mishnah, but in my book we are moving on to Mishnah 11. Okay, and it gets worse and worse. Says the Mishnah, level 4, Dever ba la'olam, plagues and epidemics. Yeah, Dever, pestilence, comes to the world. Al mitot ha'amurot b'Torah shelon nimtzeru leveidin va'al peirot shvi'it. Pestilence comes to the world for death penalties that were not carried out. What does it say on the screen? For sins punishable by death according to the Torah, but which have not been referred to the court. And the second thing that it comes to the world on account of is V'al Peirot Shavuot, for fruits of the 7th year. The neglect of the law regarding the fruits of the sabbatical year. So that's the next level that comes up. So let's spend a couple of moments on this. So according to this, the Mishnah is telling us that plagues and epidemics will occur as a result of the wrong sympathy to criminals, or yes, misplaced sympathy to criminals rather than to victims. A faulty judicial system, a tolerance to all types of wrongdoing. These, I guess, are encapsulated in the words of the Mishnah. The death penalties that should be given according to the Torah, but which are not carried out by the court. Sins punishable by death, but they do not make their way to a Jewish court. But also included in this is a corrupt and faulty judicial system. So it would seem, perhaps, one of the things that I saw is that since we collectively, judicially, were indiscriminate towards who the victim would be, so the cause and effect is that something that comes to the world is indiscriminate with its choice of victims. If society is apathetic, if society is unwilling to distinguish between right and wrong, between the criminal and the victim, if everybody is equal and terrorists are put on the same level as innocent victims, right, or abusers are made out to be the victim instead of the abuser, etc., etc., so then that gets met with an indiscriminate punishment, calamity, tragedy, which doesn't distinguish between good and bad, and innocent and guilty, and right and wrong, and old and young, etc., etc. Everybody gets swept up as a result of the bigger lack of commitment to justice and to fairness and to equality. As I said, I think we'll go through these, and then I think we'll come back for comments. All right, and then the other thing, what's interesting is really that you could look at that and be like, okay, fine, if we're not going to have a clear commitment to justice, then that's quite a big deal. Then the next thing that the Mishnah says is it's also going to be on account of Peirot Shavuot, right? So the Shemitah cycle, the 7-year cycle, which, as we've mentioned before, is there to remind us that we are not the owners of our land, but Hashem is the owner, and we are the trustees of these parcels of land. So every 7 years we don't work the land, and anything that grows is really available to everybody. And we're not supposed to be cultivating this produce and trying to make profit off this produce, etc., etc. It's there to remind us, or the mitzvah is there to remind us, that Hashem runs the world and that He controls the world. And if we're not going to get that message by being able to invest in the mitzvah, then the Mishnah is saying that we're going to learn that lesson from something that will happen in the world, where we will just say that it's out of our control, and clearly Hashem is in control. So that seems to be the connection. We're purposely avoiding learning the lesson that Hashem is in control. So He sends a virus, or He sends a plague, or He sends an epidemic, or He sends something to the world where we've got no choice but to say, "Wow, this is out of our hands," and this is all Hashem. Number 5, Cherev ba'a le'olam. The sword comes to the world. The sword of war. Is that what it says on the screen? The sword. Yeah, the sword comes to the world. Al inui hadin va'al ivut hadin va'al hamorim b'torah shelo kahalacha. It comes on account of the delay of justice, the perversion of justice, and for rendering decisions contrary to the halacha. Comes for the delay of judgment, perversion, and because those who teach the Torah not in accordance with the accepted law. So this is a lot to take in. It's a lot to take in, guys. There's a lot going on over here. But let's pull apart what these 3 things are. Inui hadin, the delay of justice. So we're supposed to have a system of law and a system of judgment that is fair and is efficient and is effective and it's unbiased. And without such a system, then the seeds of strife will be able to grow and they'll be able to flourish. And that will lead to violence, to murder, to all kinds of terrible things. And so we're supposed to have judges and rabbis and leaders who are trustworthy and unbiased. And if we don't do this, if we pervert justice, if we rule incorrectly, then we're undermining the justice system as we're supposed to have it. Delaying judgment. According to Jewish law, if a person was sentenced to the death penalty in Jewish law, there's no concept of serving life. Right? The death penalty had to be carried out that day. Why? Because even for a guilty criminal, for someone who by Torah law deserves a death penalty, we still have a commandment, we still have a mitzvah of treating people how we would want to be treated. And so the death penalty, according to Jewish law, had to be carried out that day. Because to delay that and to cause them that trauma and the uncertainty of not knowing when it's actually going to be carried out, that is a very bad thing in Jewish law. So delaying justice, not serving a victim in a way that they should be served, not serving a perpetrator in the way that they should also be served, it undermines the judicial system according to the way the Torah sees it. Perverting justice, bribery, all these kinds of corrupt things that could be taking place is also a terrible thing. Rendering the wrong law purposely, permitting the forbidden, forbidding the permitted, all of these things overthrow the three foundations of the world. If we think about these three things for a second, there's a parallel between the foundations of the world that we mentioned all the way back in chapter 1. We said the world rests on three things: justice, truth, and peace. And so if we delay justice, then we overthrow that pillar. If we pervert justice, we are overthrowing the pillar of truth. And if we and what was the third one? And if we do not let's try that one again. If we pervert justice, then we are perverting and overthrowing peace, or whichever one it is. And if we do not rule correctly in accordance with the Torah, in accordance with halakha, then we are overthrowing the pillar of truth. And that brings about cherev. It brings about the sword according to the Meiri. It brings about chorban. That's the same word. It brings about destruction. It corrupts the world. These physical actions have a spiritual consequence, which is manifested in a physical way. And the physical way that's proportionate, according to the Mishnah, is cherev, that you have brought destruction to the world. And so it's going to bring destruction further. People are going to react in a destructive way. So that was number 5. I'm sorry that I'm speaking so much on this one, but I think it's important for us to see what the Mishnah says. We're not hiding it. We're seeing what it says, and then we'll open it up shortly. But it's important also to kind of see perhaps what these things are that the Mishnah is talking about. Chaya ra'a ba'a lo'olam. Wild animals come to the world. Wild beasts. What does it say on the screen? We need to scroll down on the screen. Wild beasts come to the world for swearing in vain. Shavuat shav. Va'al chilul Hashem, and for desecrating God's name. So there's a couple of interesting things here. First of all, what is a shavuat shav? A false, a vain oath. What does it say there? Swearing in vain. So the examples that the Talmud brings is that you swear in God's name that something is something. So a person may say that they swear that this is a wallet. Well, of course it's a wallet. It's obviously a wallet, right? You don't need to swear in God's name and make an oath that that this is a wallet. This is clearly a wallet. And the other option is that you may hold up with something which is so obviously a wallet and say that you swear in God's name that this is a plant pot, right? It so obviously isn't. And so these are the types of examples of a Shavuot Shav, a vain oath, where you're bringing God into the equation when you just didn't need to. So there's an element here of the power of speech, which we've talked about before, the importance of using our words to speak truth, to say things which are accurate, and to only call upon the power of an oath, the power of a vow, when it absolutely needs to be brought in. It's also a caution about misleading statements and the way in which we talk to other people. So wild beasts come to the world on account of Shavuot Shav, on account of vain oaths. Why might that be the case? So perhaps that's the case because the faculty of speech, the ability to speak, and the ability to create a Kiddush Hashem as well, right? That we can bring honor to Hashem through the actions that we do, through the choices that we make, through the things that we say. So that capacity for humans is what distinguishes us from animals. And so if we abuse that privilege, then perhaps the Mishnah is saying that the spiritual effect of those physical actions brings about a physical consequence that wild animals may cause terror, or whatever word you want to use. Right? We've abused that which makes us different to animals, and as a result of that, animals are able to rain terror over humanity. There's an interesting thing here, which is before the sin of Adam Arishon, so animals were terrified of us. Right? There was no such thing as a scary lion that we're afraid that it's going to eat us. Before the sin, animals apparently did not consume other animals. They were all herbivores. And it was only after the sin, right, when we lost that divine image, so to speak, and that the world changes forever, that it led to the carnivorous activities or proclivities of different animals. So actually, before Adam's sin, animals would have been terrified by us. But now we are post Adam's sin. What that means is that there's a potential for the tables to turn and for us to be severely impacted by the animals around us. Not everybody interprets this literally. Some people interpret this figuratively, that actually the Chaya Ra'ah are people, and that there's a danger that through our actions, people around us will behave like wild animals, and we're more likely to encounter them. So we see this with road rage, we see this with muggers, with terrorists, with abusers. These are all people who are behaving in a wild and animalistic way. And perhaps it's because we pushed God out of our lives by not appreciating how significant it is to use his name, or on account of our actions we bring a desecration to the sanctity of God's name in this world, right? The Chilul Hashem and the vain oaths, right? These are all examples where we're pushing God out of our lives. We're saying we've got no space for him here. There's no place for God in our society, in our world, right? And so as a result of that, if we don't have that anchor of appreciating that there is a reason to be good and a reason to be moral, then it may mean that we're less likely to suppress those temptations that otherwise keep us in check. Why shouldn't a person be greedy? Why shouldn't a person be violent? Why shouldn't a person be angry? Right? It's only because we've got a voice trying to keep us grounded and anchored that people are able to do that. But if you remove all of that, then you can unleash wild forces in society. We can be blinded to the consequences of the things that we do. So that is the concept of wild animalistic behavior coming to the world on account of pushing out Hashem and his presence in this world. And then the final one, Galus Ba'a La'olam, exile comes to the world on account of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayot, and Shfichas Damim. Where have we heard those three before? They're the three cardinal sins: idol worship, immorality, sexual misconduct, and spilling blood. So these three fundamental principles: monotheism, sanctity of life, moral sexual conduct. We're supposed to give up our lives rather than violate these three things. And the Mishnah is telling us that these three things cause us to be exiled. And the final one it mentions is Shmitas Haaretz, the concept of not adhering to the laws of Shemitah. So the exile that we're talking about is exile from the land of Israel. Fundamentally, we're taught in the Torah that the land of Israel will not bear mistreatment. The Torah talks about how it will vomit us out of the land if we bring about this behavior and try and live in this unethical way in the land of Israel. It will spit us out. It will vomit us out. That's the language that the Torah uses. We're supposed to protect Eretz Yisrael. And if we don't, then we bring about exile. Now, the Gemara teaches us that the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and we endured 70 years of exile on account of these three things, on account of the idol worship, sexual misconduct, and the bloodshed, which was prolific at the time. The first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. We were exiled for 70 years. We're taught later on, this is the reason why it's not in the Mishnah, because the Mishnah records the statements of Chazal from the time of the first temple, but not from the time of the second temple. But we're taught that the second temple was destroyed, and the 2,000 plus year exile is on account of baseless hatred. That's not mentioned in the Mishnah, but that's also clearly something that is that causes exile, which is baseless hatred. Now, we've gone through 7 different categories of punishment. The Baal Shem Tov says exile is the worst of them all. Why is exile the worst of them all? Because he says there's nothing worse than forgetting who you are. There's no worse punishment than forgetting your family, your home, your tradition, your God. To lose the appreciation for what we once had and to be completely disconnected from that is one of the worst punishments that we could have. And unfortunately, we see this in the physical sense with people experiencing family members who go through dementia, who go through Alzheimer's and these different conditions which affect people's memory, right? You lose that sense of identity. It's almost impossible to maintain the relationship that you had once before on account of a person forgetting who they are, forgetting where they came from, forgetting these fundamental things. So exile is the collective national forgetting of who we are, the collective national appreciation that we are royalty in Hashem's eyes, that we are princes and princesses of Hashem, and we've forgotten all of that over the last 2,000 years, and we no longer have an appreciation for what we had, and we settle for considerably less. It's amazing how in this day and age we have so much materially and physically, but we've lost all sense of perspective and sense of remembrance of what we had spiritually, and the fact that we don't appreciate it, that's the testimony to why the punishment is so severe, because we've forgotten what we've got. We've forgotten what we've had. We don't have that identity as part of us. There's nothing worse than that. Imagine you've got a prince or princess born into royalty, and they're sent away from the palace, and they're raised amongst the poor people, and they're rolling around in the mud trying to find scraps of food. Paul, we'll see you soon. I wanted to get feedback from everyone, but I'll give you a call. Right, so you've got a prince or princess rolling around in the mud trying to find little grains and little bits of food and vegetables here, and you go up to them and you're like, "What are you rolling around in the mud for? You're a prince. You're the son of the king. You're the daughter of the king. What are you rolling around in the mud?" And they're like, "Well, I don't know any different. This is what I've got." So spiritually, that's where we are now. we may live in our lovely homes with our central heating and our indoor plumbing and our abundance of food and our iPads and our computers and our widescreen TV, and we've got an abundance, but we don't even know what we're missing. We don't appreciate that we're missing. And there's no worse punishment than that, according to the Baal Shem Tov. So that is our Mishnah. We've at least understood perhaps what the Mishnah was trying to convey to us. It's taken a long time to get through it, but let's stop now for comments and for questions. Over to you guys. It's okay to be speechless as well. It's a lot to take in and it's a lot to absorb. But I'm wondering perhaps if we'll leave it there for today and then maybe pick it up again next week, and allow people to make comments and ask questions then. But it's heavy. Pardon me, Martin. Hmm. I'm glad that you find it easy. I don't find it easy. Hmm. Okay, well, I'm going to stop the recording for everyone watching on Facebook, and I think we'll maybe give this another go next week, so that people can have a chance to react and respond. Um, so I think I'm going to do that. So to all those on Facebook, and to all those on YouTube, we wish you a wonderful, meaningful day. Join us again next week, and we'll probably discuss this a bit more, and maybe move on to another Mishnah as well. But in the meantime, thanks for joining, and take care.